Joined us, and it's now my great pleasure to invite him to present his paper. Before that, a word about Professor Bialer. His paper reads Iran, Israel, and the question of energy before the revolution. Professor Bialer is Emeritus Professor of International Relations at the Hebrew University and holder of the Maurice Hexter Chair in International Relations, Middle Eastern Studies. He is author of numerous books. I just mentioned three of them that are relevant to our seminar today. The first one, Between East and West, Israel's Foreign Policy Orientation 48 to 56, came out by Cambridge University Press, first edition in 1990, the second edition in 2009. The second book, very relevant to our to his presentation today, Oil and the Arab-Israeli Conflict, 1948 and 1963, came out by St. Andrews, Oxford. And the last one, Cross on the Star of David, the Christian World in Israel's Foreign Policy, 1948 till 1967, was published by Indiana University Press by 2005. I could go on, but we want to hear the lecture. So Professor Bialer just told me he's kind enough, because he researched this topic, he will say also a few words about the very beginning of the relation between Israel and Iran, the topic of Mr. Chakov, Doron Yitzhakov, who unfortunately couldn't come because of his being ill. So Professor Bialer will, in a way, also replace him. So please, you have another extra 5 minutes for this extra topic.
מלמעלה. שלא עושים זה לא עובד.
Okay, good morning. I'm very pleased to be here. As a matter of fact, I consider myself to be a student of the topic, because unlike all of you who are Iranian heads, experts in Iran looking out, I can boast only to a modest capacity of analyzing Israel looking out, Jerusalem looking out, and this is what brought me to the topic. And a few words about how I came about that topic. I am not an Orientalist. The Middle East had not been for a very long time my area of study, with the exception of Israel, because I wrote about Israel. And I started up as an expert on Israel, because I was there when Israel decided to open up the documents. And that was ages ago, and that gave rise to the new historians, and you know the story. But I am a new old historian, with, the philosophical approach and methodological approach of that. But we all base our studies about the documents, Israel documents, and that really led me to the topic. Initially, I wrote about Israel foreign policy, global foreign policy between East and West. And I was then at the archive, and being an historical voyeur, so to speak, I looked at material which were beyond my expertise. I just wandered around the archive, and all of a sudden I came across a single file which amazed me, because I noticed that although it was written with code names and code terms, and it was very difficult to understand what was it all about, but I gathered that it had to do something with Iran, and it had something to do with the Iranian recognition of Israel. One thing led to another, and an article of mine was published by the Middle East Journal, which dealt with a topic that was ages ago, 85, and I was the first to to dwell into it, and I'm going to say something about that. And then I left Iran. Really, I left Iran as a topic until I started to write a book about Israel's oil diplomacy. That was a major work, the first work in its kind, if I may say so, based on documents and another branch of the archive, which was open, and I was simply first there, and with the ability to spend hundreds, thousands of hours reading those boring documents about oil, and it ended up with a book about Israel oil diplomacy, which is really innovative, and again, it brought me back to Tehran. And the last inroad into the topic had to do with my curiosity about a single person who was very, very prominent in establishing diplomatic relations and economic relations with Iran, preceding the late Ezri here. The name was Tzvi Doriel, who was really the founder, long forgotten founder of Israel's relation with Iran. I got a scholarship from the Rothschild Foundation, and what ended up with 2 major articles about Doriel. So I came to the topic of Iran from the outside looking in, or if you adopt Jerusalem as the center, so it's Jerusalem looking up. This is what brought me to the topic. I offered Professor Gilbert to say something about Iranian recognition of Israel because I was the first to plunge into the topic and to see and to understand really the process. And again, I'm not an expert of Iran, so all those who are familiar with Iran and listening to me and noticing mistakes, grave mistakes, please bear with me. I know I'm on a sure ground about Jerusalem. I've never been to Tehran. Iran was the second country in the Middle East to have recognized Israel. The first was Turkey. Turkey preceded Iran. I think Turkey recognized Israel in December, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 1949. Iran recognized de facto in 1950. What has brought the 2 sides together? I'm not totally sure about the Iranian, with the exception of 2 motivations which brought Iran to Israel, to recognize Israel. First of all, detachment for the Arab-Israeli conflict. The Iranian was not there during the war of '48, with the exception of contributing, ambulances and medical help to the fighters, the Arab fighters in Palestine. They were simply not there. I mean, it really did not interest so much Iran at the time. So Iran was not, the inner circle, the Arab inner circle, outside there. There was a perception of the Jews, the omnipotent Jews, who could help Iranians pave their way into Washington. I mean, an illusion, but we were not very quick to correct that kind of illusion, and that was another major reason for that. The last one was simply bribery. Israel paid something like $7 million bribe into the pocket of the Iranian Prime Minister Saad at the time, with the knowledge of the Shah, who took another economic advantage of that. And that really made it. Interesting enough is what made Israel, what brought Israel to Iran. Not an interest in itself. Israel was not interested in Iran at the time. It was, in the midst of the '48 war, absorption of immigration, the state building, etc. Iran was very far away. There were no real experts on Iran, and Iran was really beyond the horizon, long after the horizon. What brought Israel to Iran was the immigration of Iraqi Jew, and you heard about that. The idea was how to effect a large wave of immigration from Iraq. Initially illegal and then legal immigration from Iraq. And the obvious answer, looking at the globe and then the map, is through Iran. That was easy to do. Problem is that it was done before March 1950, but it cost a lot of money because you had to bribe your way into Iran, and it was very problematic. So the ingenious idea of the birther of the Jewish agency was to save money and to buy the Iranian government consent for the transport of Jews, and that was really done. Problem is, And fascinating problem. How do you do that in Tehran when the Jewish presence, when Israeli presence is not allowed? When they were all pretending to be Iranian, the Israeli emissaries at the time, you could not engage in diplomacy with the Shah, with the court, under that circumstances. And here comes a very sexy piece of the story, and I don't have the time to go into that. If you press me later on, I shall do that. Israel had at its disposal an American Jew, former Israeli, who was agricultural attaché, in addition to other capacities in Tehran, and he helped Israeli emissaries to find their way into the court, and it ended up with the recognition. And with the fact, which has to do with what I'm going to say now, later on, with the fact that the Iranians did not really keep their promise. They promised a full diplomatic relation. They insisted later on de facto recognition, and in mid-1950, the consulate in Jerusalem was closed down. So that was something which all Israelis who were dealing with Iran remember ages after 1950. The fact that you can't really count on the Iranians. Interesting fact. It's a lesson learned from that experience. Pain, we invested efforts, finally. However, Israelis could move into Iran freely after 1950, and that really helped Israel. So that's recognition. Am I okay with the time? Okay. Now to the topic. That was the introduction to the preliminary note, etc. Okay. Let me say something about the topic. It's a very, very difficult topic to deal with. Economic diplomacy, oil diplomacy, etc. The one reason is that governments are not quick to declassify documents dealing, with this kind of business, ongoing business, which it went on for a very long time. And as you know now, even now, we had some unsolved business with the Iranians concerning that topic, and I'm not going to enlarge about that. So governments are not quick to let people see what they were doing ages ago. Much more difficult problem I faced when writing that book was the fact that I'm, as a political historian, I'm used, and I started my career as a British historian, working at a PRO. I'm not used to read, these dry documents of experts, economic experts about this and that. Because we used to read, political documents and juicy stuff, and to be quick to go into what went behind what we are told, etc. This is not the case with those people who are dealing with oil. They know numbers, they know terms of the contract, etc. They can speak a lot about quality of oil. Boring, I must share it with you, terribly boring. And it took me a long time, years of study to see light, to see the light, to see the story behind, and I'm going to share it with you, some of the things. Now, I'm not going to elaborate about the known facts. You all know that Iran was the major provider, or the only provider, of oil to Israel from the mid-50s, from 55, not 56, 7, 55, from 1955 to 1978, which means that Iran provided 85 or 90% of Israel's oil consumption for a very long time. The only one. That was really, in a nutshell, the most important background for what I term the political realm, or the political aspect of relation between Iran and Israel. I know that some people will not agree with me. I think that it was oil, which really was the center of gravity in Israel's relation with Iran. Not intelligence, not military, not even strategic. That was the thing viewed from Jerusalem. When a state receives for 20 long years 90% of its energy consumption from a single source, Iran, with no real alternative, You know, you don't have to be Kissinger to understand that that was the crux of the matter, and people who were engaged in that really confirmed that. So Israel was trying to lubricate its way, among other things, by intelligence, by strategy, by etc., by politics, etc., but it was all bound to serve a single purpose, and that's oil. Can I go down and finish? That was it. That's my impression. And I'm basing that on a very long acquaintance with Israeli documents, with Israeli perspective. Of course, you know, there are other aspects to the story, and people are going to share with you, and you will listen to something before, and you're going to listen to other who are going to speak about Iran, etc. The story is highly complicated. It's a fascinating story. But strategically speaking, viewed from Jerusalem, it's oil, oil, oil. That was it. Now I'm coming to oil. Let's start, and I'm going to say something about Iran because, you know, it's a business between Iran and Israel, so I have to know something about Iran, and I'm going to share with you what I know, but I will emphasize mainly what the perspective from Jerusalem. Now, Israel depended, like many other states, on energy. There is no existence to a state without energy, and Israel was deprived. Israel was the land of milk, honey, and Allah, not oil. And that was a major kind of weakness which characterized our national existence for ages. We were not allowed, Israelis were not allowed to publish or speak about that openly for a very long time, and as a matter of fact, from the mid-50s, it was banned, it was outlawed by law of the Knesset not to publish, say, or reveal information regarding oil consumption in Israel. And this is amazing. This is amazing. This explains why Benjamin Shvadran, who was deeply engaged in diplomacy in the pre-state period involving American oil companies, etc., and then published his famous books. Look at the sources. I mean, he didn't have anything, or perhaps he knew a lot, but nothing in written. And until my book was published, people were really obeying state law and didn't know very much about that. Okay. So the weakness. Israel did not produce oil. Neither was it able to purchase oil freely in the market. And I'm speaking about it from very early on. The reason why it was not, it could not buy oil was, first of all, British decision. Britain provided oil for Palestine, for mandatory Palestine in the pre-48 period. Britain built up the Kirkuk-Haifa pipeline, and Israel benefited from that. The British exerted exorbitant price for that, and the calculations for which were presented to the Jewish agency at the time was as if the oil was brought up from the Caribbean. You don't want it? All too bad. No oil, no British oil, and they had a monopoly. So Israel was, the Jewish agency was bound to pay exorbitant price for the oil. Okay, but oil was there until 48. In 1948, the British decided to leave Palestine, not only political, strategic, militarily, but oil-wise also, to close down the Haifa refinery. That was a terrible prospect for the Jewish state, because the closing down of the Haifa refinery meant no oil. Really no oil, because they were the provider of oil, they had the key, and there was no alternative or no real alternative to British companies, and I include Shell with that. Because the Americans, with the exception of two small companies, were not eager to provide oil for the Jewish state. It did not happen. Finally, it did not happen. I shall not go into that. If you want, in the Q&A session, I can enlarge about the wonderful technique used by Israel at the time to circumvent and to allow the opening up of the Haifa refineries. Suffice it to say, and that's a major lesson I learned from the documents. You know, the history of the Middle East is full of examples of nation states who were fighting, oil concessions of the Europeans and others. The first thing a national liberation movement does in the Middle East was to let us have the oil. It's our oil, it's not your oil. So expelling the Europeans, expelling the powers from our oil wells. That was exactly the opposite of what Ben Gurion and company did in terms of oil and Britain. Ben Gurion and his government really forced the British to stay in Palestine energy-wise. Really forced them to do that, using all kind of tricks, and it worked. It worked because the British really lent protection, oil protection to Israel from 1950 or 1949-50 up to 1957. We were covered by the British in terms of oil, and that's another major secret, and people are not familiar with what went behind it. Okay, now we're coming to Iran. Iran was the ideal solution. Used by Israel, it was the ideal solution in terms of oil for various reasons. First of all, the quality of the oil. Haifa refinery was built up to absorb Middle East oil, which was different than many other sources of oil existing in the international arena. So the ability to exhaust oil, not just for providing energy, but the basket of petrochemical elements that you are producing, was very good, excellent in terms. So Iran was there, and Israel enjoyed the benefit of Iraqi oil in the pre-48 period. Israel enjoyed the benefit of Kuwait oil from 1950 to 1953. The British companies allowed Kuwaiti oil into Palestine, into Israel, in the early 50s. But the ideal was Iran, and Iran was ideal because quality of the oil and because of the proximity. Don't ever forget that. The idea was that you could effect the transportation of oil from Iran to Haifa, either through the Suez Canal or later on, through other routes. But the proximity was an extremely important element. Just to give you a number, a ton of oil bought in the Caribbean would cost almost 40% more than oil brought from Iran at the time. So that was really a major consideration. So Iran was there. Why no alternative? This is fascinating. When I'm speaking about alternative, why no alternative? No alternative because bringing oil, there was always the possibility of British companies engaged in bringing Caribbean oil into Haifa. There was always that possibility, but it was economically a faux pas. I mean, you don't do that when you have that Middle East source. So Iran was there. The oil companies brought Iranian oil later on, not until 1954. Now, interesting and fascinating. Israel really declined to use that option until 1955. And this is a fascinating piece of the history, because the Iranians were the first to offer Israel oil, and that was done under Mossadegh. Mossadegh initiated a move towards Israel at the time, and offered oil, and hinted that if Israel buy oil, Iran would recognize, would resume, relations which were broken in 1951. The major reason why Mossadegh did that was that Mossadegh discovered what later on Iranian leaders discovered, is that it's not enough to have the oil or have some kind of a right. You have to export the oil. You have to engage in moving the oil out. How do you do that when you are engaging in war with Britain, with the United States, with others? And Israel was, the idea was that you can do something, very little, because the Israeli consumption at that time was, I think, 500,000 tons per year, or 1 million tons per year, very small quantity, but still significant, highly significant. Mossadegh offered Israel oil, and Israel declined. To do that.
Because of the British.
What? Because of the British. Yes, definitely because of the British. Because the British control the oil business in Israel, and British consider Iranian oil as a stolen oil. That was the definition at the time. The term they used was a stolen oil, and you don't do business with stolen oil. Okay, Now comes the major event which changed dramatically the whole story, and that's, you know, the arrangement, the establishment of the consortium, the oil consortium, which replaced the old system of oil production and marketing in Tehran. And as you all know, in 1954, following the settling of the conflict with Iran, a consortium was established which changed the strategic status quo in terms of major oil companies working in Iran. The major change was the introduction of the American companies, the American sector into the business, the decline, the relative decline of the British, and the allowance of 10 or more other small companies to operate in Iran, the Uri group. That really opened up the field for Israel, because the British lost their dominance, the Americans were there, and what was much more important, there were the Uri groups which you could do business with them, and above all, the National Iranian Oil Company, NIOC, as I call it, NIOC, was established, and they had the ability of either accepting money for 12.5% of production, or selling that, and the calculation was based on posted prices. That really opened up the whole story. And it was not easy for Israel to do that, but Israel managed to do that, and I would like to share with you one major secret, which explains so much of the whole story. Israel oil connection was business, and it was based on economics, it was based on price, it was based on quality, in addition to political considerations. But the most important element in the story was, you know, money. Now, the Iranian National Oil Company, which was really the pivot upon which Israel worked its way into Tehran, had the option of doing nothing. Doing literally nothing, getting 12.5% of the entire production of the consortium without moving their fingers, and getting the posted price at the time. And the posted, all you know what's the posted price. The posted price is the formal price of oil. You know, it comes from American history. The oil fields in Texas, etc. Each owner of the oil field used to stick, a note informing the others what the price of a ton of oil, and it became, the synonym of the formal price of oil. At that time, the posted price of oil was really higher than the actual price of oil, and the NIOC had the option of doing nothing and getting, the best of all worlds. And this explains why. 5 minutes to end. My God. This explains why. Okay, so that's the secret. This explains why, for more than 10 years, Iran, NIOC, had very little economic interest in selling oil at all. The only way of persuading NIOC to sell oil to Israel was to offer them posted prices, which economically was nonsense at the time. But viewed from Jerusalem, that was a very clever decision, because they paid very dearly for the opening up of the gates, investing in the future and working their way later on. And this explains why, in terms of oil, Israel did not buy really a state-produced oil from Iran until the late 60s.